program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the Eau Claire Area School Board.
All right, it's 4:01 and we'll call the meeting to order. Maynard, are we in compliance with open meetings laws? Somebody give me a thumbs up if you can hear me.
Yeah.
All right.
I can hear you, Tim.
All right, Marissa, do you have the knowledge that we're in compliance with our open meetings laws?
I believe so, yes.
We'll take that as a yes then. Thank you. Let's do a roll call for verification of quorum.
Commissioner Clements,
Present.
Commissioner Harder,
Here.
Commissioner Lyons,
Here.
Commissioner Nordine,
Here.
Commissioner Johnson,
Here.
Commissioner Zur, here. Commissioner Vika.
Here.
All right, those of you who are willing and able, please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Once again, tonight, we do not have any members of the public signed up for our public forum. So we will move directly to our next item, which is the Superintendent's Report. Superintendent Johnson.
Good evening. Today is such an important time as we honor and recognize Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. The recent events over the past several months show us that the hopes and dreams of Dr. King and those he inspired are critical. My hope for our district is we can be a physically and emotionally safe place for our students, most notably for those of all underrepresented groups, but also one free of systemic barriers. As I've examined academic achievement data, suspension rates, and other demographic trends, I've noticed we have much to accomplish for our students and families of color. While I know that many of us in the district have shared this message with students and colleagues today, I'm also inspired that so many community members in Eau Claire have paused to reflect on Dr. King and dedicated their time and passion to support his dream. Related to this note, I recently learned about our Power of Perception program, a mentoring program for African American and biracial students at the secondary level. They've been engaged in a special project in partnership with the folks at Royal Credit Union since early December, developing their own business plans and are presenting to celebrity judges in a Shark Tank type format to determine individuals who earn startup funding. Last week, these students presented their plans to the RCU team, and I was able to witness, not to be a judge, in preparation for their final competition tomorrow night. I really appreciate the invitation and passion of the organizers, our partners from RCU, our mentors, and more specifically, the students. Your dedication made my evening. Good luck tomorrow. Last week, I'd like to recognize student transit. We appreciate the safe driving on Friday. Jim Fine and his staff's attention to the road conditions in our district operations is outstanding. We value his communication at any time of night or early in the morning. On a similar weather note, I'd like to extend my gratitude to our buildings and ground staff across the district. I was at 5 schools Friday. I appreciated that sidewalks and entryways were cleared. I know that our custodians are very busy early in those mornings clearing snow from sidewalks, common areas, and parking lots. It's very noticeable, much appreciated for people like me who are advancing in age and don't have the reflexes I once did when I do slip, given my height, plus I do have quite a ways to fall. Last week, I learned of the fantastic partnership with TV13 and the Eau Claire Public Schools Foundation and the Golden Apple Awards. While I wasn't present for all of them, I think we had 14 or 15. I was able to witness a few, thanks to Sarah French from the foundation and their generosity, as well as Bob Gallagher with TV13. Congratulations to the recipients. There seemed to be a theme throughout in listening to the statements of the recipients. They talked about their colleagues. They couldn't have done it without them. They felt such inspiration and support. So thanks to those staff members for such a positive week. Finally, I have a bit of a COVID update this evening. The rollout of COVID-19 vaccines to district employees began Friday for staff in Phase 1A, the staff members who provide health care to students. I'd like to single out Kai-Ying Zhang and Kim Kohler for their critical and immediate attention in a very short time. We were notified that there were doses available Thursday evening. They quickly informed select staff as soon as possible to receive that first dose on Friday. Phase 1B is going to begin shortly and will include all district employees who are not included in 1A, that's probably 1,250 other staff members. This week, principals, directors, and other supervisors will meet with their respective staff members to discuss considerations within Phase 1B. They will pass that feedback on to district staff as well, who are coordinating with the health department and our local providers for the vaccines. We respect and look forward to our staff input and appreciate their understanding, patience, and flexibility in this tremendous task. Thank you.
We'll move on to the board president's report. Last Friday, the board survey to help guide our results policy building was completed. We had over 1,000 responses and would like to thank everyone who participated. Commissioners Zur, Clements, and I will soon be meeting to discuss translating this feedback into a report for the full board and building a draft of results policy for coherent governance. Beginning tomorrow, the WASB annual meetings start, of course, virtually this year, offering many development sessions and opportunities to learn about the work of boards across the state. Superintendent Johnson and I will both be attending, and I will represent the ECASD at the Delegate Assembly on Wednesday, which helps to guide WASB policy advocacy for the coming year. We'll be discussing and voting on the ECASD positions on the draft resolutions tonight. I look forward to sharing with you all from the Delegate Assembly as well as lessons from the larger meeting. And as Superintendent Johnson noted, we encourage you to spend some time tonight reflecting on and celebrating Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Thank you. We'll next move on to our student representatives. We'll start with Zoe Wolf from North High School.
Good evening. The past 2 weeks have been busy at North. With the end of the semester drawing near, students and staff are feeling the tension. Finals began last week for Cohort B and are starting this week for Cohort A. The stress levels are higher than usual due to the immensity of finals. However, most teachers allow for a study day and review, which helps students prepare. Tomorrow is the last day of finals, with the semester wrapping up on Wednesday. Aside from the stress of finals, there are some positive things happening as well. I have gotten to see the dress code amendment firsthand at school. Many students have been wearing their hats around, which is great to see that environmental change. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move on to our representative from Memorial, Emery Toole.
I have a pretty short report today. The only thing that has really changed as far as the virtual model is we had finals. I thought that overall they went pretty well. I would actually argue that in the virtual model, at least it was a bit less stressful than normal. And then in the larger scope of the world, I'd also like to recognize Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his achievements. I think his teachings and actions are perhaps, unfortunately, more relevant today than they have been in a long while. And I think we need to continue to reflect on his achievements in his lifetime and how they apply to where we are today.
Thank you. We'll now move to our school board committee reports. We'll start with budget development. Commissioner Harder.
Thanks. Hello, everybody. We did meet Budget Development Committee January 6th and continued our discussion about compensation. As I think all board members at this point have heard at least once or twice that our budget is broken up kind of in an 80-20 fashion between people costs and then other costs. And we're spending our time continuing to look at compensation, which covers that sort of bigger chunk of the budget, we talked a lot about trying to look at it holistically, and how to do that in a way that involves input from staff, all the staff, downtown staff, building staff, as well as gets including board input and thinking as well. So we're continuing that process, and we'll meet again next week, Wednesday at 3 p.m. to continue that discussion.
Thank you. Demographic trends and facilities planning, Kim Kohler.
We anticipate that the study from the Applied Populations Lab will be here in the district within the next week or so. And after that is received, they'll be meeting with the Demo and Trends Committee, and we're hoping to also have them share information with the board.
Thank you. LEAP, Jim Schmidt.
Yep, so we had 4 things that the committee worked on last week. One was moving the innovation video for the district forward, and the first filming of that took place soon after that meeting. The second was they reviewed the Acres for Joy initial proposal idea, and Superintendent Johnson and myself and members of the LEAP committee were out there on Friday to visit that site. The Arctic Zone was working on the standards-based gradebook, and the documentary theater set up their renewal of their performance agreement plan.
Thank you. Policy and governance met twice over the past 2 weeks. Most significantly, we completed our work on the proposed equity statement and have recommended it to the full board for consideration. Board members have already received a copy of the draft, and we will have it on our next meeting agenda for a first reading. Kate Marks shared drafts of new rules in our interview practice to increase equity. We had discussion, and we'll be working on similar rules changes for recruitment. We also reviewed and recommended to the board policy 852 regarding use of district trademarks, which we're discussing later this evening. And finally, we continued our work on governance culture drafts, and we'll be devoting a larger portion of our P&G time to completing this project over the next several meetings. We look forward to adding that draft to our growing body of coherent governance policies. Our next meeting will be this Thursday at 1 p.m. where we will discuss hiring and retention and coherent governance. Thank you. We next move on to our legislative update. Dr. Johnson.
On January 15th, Governor Ear plans to extended the statewide face covering mandate. The current order mandating face coverings across the state is set to expire tomorrow. The governor said his new order will extend that requirement for another 60 days as the state works on distributing vaccines. That would extend the order into March. On January 12th, the State Disaster Medical Advisory Committee, charged with setting Wisconsin state plans for allocating the COVID-19 vaccine release, its finalized draft recommendation for the next phase of vaccine distribution. Among the population groups included for prioritization in the draft phase 1B distribution plan are individuals serving in daycare, preschool, K-12, and higher education. The Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act was signed into law on December 27, 2020, and provides an additional $54.3 billion for the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, ESSER 2 fund. According to figures released by the U.S. Department of Education, Wisconsin's allocation of ESSER 2 funds is estimated to be slightly more than $686 million, of which $617.5 million will be allocated to local school districts. Thank you.
Thank you. We now move to our consent agenda. The board considers approval of the consent agenda with one vote without discussion. Board members have received information about agenda items or we have discussed them at a previous meeting. If any board member wants to discuss an item, it can be pulled out of the consent agenda to be voted on separately. The items on tonight's consent agenda are the minutes of January 4th, 2021, minutes of closed session, January 4th, 2021, financial report, December 2020, gifts in the amount of $55,164.22 for the period of December 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2020. Payment of all bills in the amount of $6,857,987.17. And net payroll in the amount of $3,581,961.45 for the period of December 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2020. Human Resources Employment Report, Administrator Contact Renewals, Open Enrollment for 2021-2022, Job Description and Labor Market Review. At this time, I would hear a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Let's take a roll call vote.
Commissioner Clements,
Yes.
Commissioner Harder,
Yes.
Commissioner Lyons,
Yes.
Commissioner Nordine,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Zur,
Yes.
Commissioner Vika.
Yes.
So at this time, we have in our agenda the adjournment to our work session for tonight. I know that Jan Berg, the president of DeForest, is on the meeting. Welcome, Jan. But I think we might still be waiting for her colleague, Steve Tempest, to arrive. So with the 15 minutes that we have here that we're running a little ahead, I wonder if it would be okay with everybody if we moved up the possible reading and discussion of policy 852 and try to take care of that prior to beginning the work session to give Steve a little bit more time to join on. And he's here, so maybe actually go the other direction. Okay, well, actually, Marissa has just told me that Steve is here. Welcome, Steve. So actually, maybe we'll just move right into the work session and we'll get going. So it's, of course, my pleasure to welcome Jan Berg and Steve Tempest of the DeForest School Board, the president and vice president, to join us tonight. I had reached out and asked them to consider coming and spending an hour this evening with our board as we work on coherent governance to give us a chance to ask questions. It certainly is one thing as we work together and ask questions and read our sources, but it's always good to hear from folks that are actually using the system so that some of those concerns that we have and items are able to be answered by people who actually are working on it. So tonight, what I plan to do here is in just a second, I will ask Jan and Steve, I hope you are okay with me using your first names tonight.
Absolutely.
Thank you. To share with us, we had submitted some questions ahead of time, and I'd like for you to start in just a moment with sharing with us one of the questions that perhaps you'd like to answer that caught your eye as you looked through. At that point, after that, we'll go through, we'll just do alphabetically through our board members. So when it comes to, if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to do so. But if you want to just continue to listen, you're welcome to pass at that time. And then I've also spoken with Superintendent Johnson. We'll go to him after the board for a question from his perspective and the exec team's perspective. And then with additional time, we'll just continue to loop around or we'll dig into the questions that we had submitted in advance. So once again, Jan and Steve, thank you for being here. If you would be willing to share with us a question that we had asked of you ahead of time that you'd like us to hear the answer for, we'll start with that.
Well, there were so many questions, it's hard to know where to start, I'd have to say. I think that they tend to all be much of there's a theme, I think, emerging in many of them, and it's letting go of the past practices and then moving forward into something that seems uncomfortable, I would imagine. I think one of the things that caught my eye was the idea of trust and control on the first from Lori, I think. And I would have to say, as having served on a school board for a very long time and also being an administrator myself in another public venue capacity, that the board's control is somewhat mythical to begin with. A lot of day-to-day decisions get made all the time by your superintendent and by his administrators and by teachers in the classroom. Everybody's making decisions on a regular basis, none of which you see and none of which you have control over. So that control in a way is a bit of an ideal that doesn't probably really exist. And trust is another thing that should exist, because you have to trust your people that they're highly trained and qualified professionals, that they're doing the job that they were hired to do, and that you don't have to supervise, you don't have to directly supervise them to get the results you want. I think trust is foundational. And if you don't trust your superintendent, I think, you should get rid of them and get one that you can trust, because you can't really work with, in this model, or really any model, where trust doesn't exist between you and your employees. So I'll just stop there.
Thank you. Steve, how about you? What's something that in our pre-ask questions you'd like us to hear about early on?
Well, one of the themes I noticed was the communication with the public, and I think that's a great concern. It's a high priority, and one of the ways that we actually have a monitoring report that addresses communication, and so we have a policy that identifies communication with the public as a priority for the district. And so then the way it works is the superintendent says, I understand this value and here's how we interpret it. So they break down what that means, and they come back to us and say, is this how you interpret, or is this a proper interpretation of the value of communicating with the public? And then you agree or disagree. In general, you have enough discussions prior to the writing that of the monitoring report that our superintendent and our administrators have been very good at hitting it. So then we do the other critical piece there is we do measurable benchmarks, and that's how we do our evaluation of our monitoring reports. We have measurable benchmarks that we agree upon. So, for example, I was just looking at one. It's a climate survey with the public. So we ask the public to chime in and just on a number of climate elements. And we do that and report back to the board once a year. And that's our assurance that the board is maintaining open communication. So as you can see, there's going to be those type of metrics throughout the communication. So communication with staff, communication with the public, things like that, communication with student parents and students. But the other, I think there's some more significant pieces that we do with the communication that I think is very important, especially as far as coherent governance is concerned. Our main effort with coherent governance, because we worked with some support as we were fine-tuning our coherent governance, and they kept asking us, what's the most important thing? What's the most important thing? And we had to think about it a little bit, and we finally came to student achievement. If that isn't the most important thing, then we kind of really, what are we doing if student achievement isn't our most important thing? So with that, then that helped also determine our communication strategy. So we actually had a couple of we've identified a small time-limited group within the school board to go out and communicate directly. So with our PTO groups, parent groups, and talk about how we're meeting and if we are meeting our student learning metrics. So we tended to tie that right around the report card, the state report card time, and try to both explain some of the items in the report card, but also talk about, that was a good opportunity for us to say, we don't just turn this stuff over to the superintendent and say, geez, I hope you do a good job with student achievement. We demonstrated to them through that we had measurable items that the superintendent had to meet in order to be in compliance with our expectations. And I think that helped the public understand that it's more than, because there's a little bit of a feeling sometimes that you're just turning over the keys to the superintendent and saying, we really don't want to be bothered with anything, so we'll see you once a month on Monday, and just do it, just get it done. And this demonstrates that the school board is actually the ones driving which direction we're going with student achievement, that we do have measurable goals, and we do have expectations. And then we also demonstrate that if that's not something that a superintendent is able to do, then we'll find a superintendent that can do that. I mean, that sounds blunt. I think any superintendent that is of any value would appreciate that sort of direction, rather than the moving target that happens at every meeting where one school board member says something and then another school board member says another. I can remember years ago, I've been on not as long. Jan is definitely the veteran staff member, but I've been on it for about 15 years, and I can remember one of our school board members who, every time they would report the ACT scores, he would just ask that we move it up one more point. There was no basis for that. He didn't talk about who was taking the test or what they were taking it for. He just simply wanted that score increased 1 point. Well, there's no authority there, one board member saying that, but our superintendent always had to, be kind of careful about making sure he met Marty's expectation of high ACT scores. This way, the monitoring report is a guarantee. It's something that the board has agreed on, and they've talked with the superintendent and said, we're all in agreement. So this is what we'll hold you accountable to. So that's my long-winded intro there. I'm not sure if this was the kind of the response types you were looking for, or.
I would say from my perspective, it certainly is. And we're happy to just get that sort of honest feedback and to hear your perspective. So at this time, we'll start to swing through the board members alphabetically. Feel free to ask a new question, a follow-up on a previous comment. One of the questions that you submitted ahead of time, if you submitted those, it'll just be kind of an open session. And again, if you don't have anything at the moment that it comes to you, feel free to pass and we'll come back around. So we'll start with Lori Vika.
I'd like to hear, this is a question that I submitted, and I think I'd like to hear a little bit more about feeling connected or disconnected, with teachers, other staff members, and students. So that coherent governance could cause board members to feel disconnected from day-to-day life in the schools. How have you, navigated that with your board? How do you remain connected to the people that you serve?
Go ahead, Jan.
Okay,
I'll be happy to.
I'm suffering from technological difficulties here. I can't, the video is not working for me, and I was hypothesizing that I could try logging out and coming back in. I don't know. Not that you need to see my face, mind you, but still, it's easier to talk to people face to face. So how do we stay in touch? Well, right now, we don't have any problems with our back to school plan. We have people touching us all the time. But generally we use a major community-wide event every 10 years we do a big one, and then we do retouches another big medium-sized one every 5 years, and then updates every year, where we strategically invite members of the various stakeholder groups in the community to attend what used to be a 3-day future searching event, now is slimmed down a little bit to maybe a day and a half, but and brings the community together to talk about what they want for their children, what they want to see the school district providing in terms of education, and what role they want the district to play in the community. And often what's come out of those meetings is pretty clear marching orders about, the whole child, global languages, and being part of the community too. The community piece is very large, largely of interest to our stakeholders. So that gives us a way of communicating directly with the stakeholders, but in a way that's designed to get us results that we can use, and those results do get used as part of the our policies, they become the ends or the results that we aim the district at. We often, well, in the past, we've had what I want to call like world cafes and other sorts of interactive meetings with the public. We've targeted groups to meet, like the clergy meet at a regular time, and at times board members will go and speak with them. I saw somebody was worried about people who had were disadvantaged, so they couldn't attend things. Well, if we're holding an event, we make sure there's babysitting. We make sure there's that the barriers are removed as much as possible, including transportation if need be. So I don't know what else I could say. I think
I can add a couple things. I think our framework for the future is sort of our that is a strength we build off of. Without it, I think we would have a difficult time being a valid board. We've had good luck. We've had great facilitator help us with our framework, but just I think one thing that gets misunderstood is I think people, when they think about talking to the community or an open forum with the community, they think of the gymnasium where you pull the bleachers down. A bunch of the public comes in, sits in the bleachers, and there's a microphone, and then the board sits there and takes it. They listen to all the complaints, and we do not do that at all. This is engaging. An activity where everybody comes in, board members are spread out among all the tables with members, but the key question that we ask is basically we're trying to find out what their values are. We're not asking what's the problem with the school district, but rather what do you value about education in DeForest? What do you value about your child's education? What do you value about your child's future? That makes for a very collaborative discussion. That makes for a discussion that gives us results that we can use so what happens with those results, we put them together with all the feedback we get over all the time. We do a lot of different activities where people brainstorm, where they do multi-rating of their values and their preferences. We then take that back and then we condense it into themes, and we say, well, when we talked this time, when we talked in our framework for the future, we found that there was a greater emphasis on, like Jan mentioned, global languages, or some theme. I mean, there's multiple themes that come out. And then later on, what I find is that we're having a discussion as a board, we're preparing a monitoring report, and we're trying to decide, what sort of emphasis we should have in a certain area. And that's where that feedback comes in. We can say, remember, the public talked about this. They talked about character development of our students, that our students need to walk out of the school and be of high character and have these certain values. So it comes back around that way. I think also then we can demonstrate that back to the public, and then I think they always look to us in a more collaborative fashion rather than in us versus them sort of fashion.
Thanks. We'll now move on to Josh Clemens.
Thank you for your time tonight. My challenge in trying to ensure that we move into this form of governance with our eyes wide open and the best we can be for our current composition and for our future members is to help understand how we communicate the way that we govern as a board to the public. Because I work for municipal government and getting a lot of feedback there somewhere.
yeah.
And so to try to understand, how do we communicate with the public that board members can't just wave a magic wand and change something, some operational issue or otherwise? How do we communicate with the public that what our roles are in coherent governance?
Okay.
Jan, do you want to go first?
Yeah. Yeah, so I tried coming in on my phone. That was a suggestion that was made. So, well, okay, and there you got video. So there, now you can see me in the dark here. But now I forgot the question. Well, how do we communicate with the public about what our
roles? Yeah.
our rules? Well, I think keep it simple and rather straightforward. I don't know. I mean, people who are not in coherent governance or policy governance or whatever seem to believe that they are in some kind of system. But when you ask the public what that system is, I don't think they actually know or would be able to describe it. So if you would say to your neighbor or the person who buttonholes you in the grocery store about, well, how are you keeping track of that, superintendent? I don't know what you'd say in a normal model, in a regular model. We ask him what he's doing all the time. We make him show us what he's spending money on. I don't know what you'd say, but with this model, you can say we've laid out these guidelines. We've laid out these fence posts or parameters, whatever you want to call them, that the community has told us that is of value to them. And we've said, you need to move our children's achievement from here to there. And we're not going to tell you how to do it. You just need to do it, but you need to do it within this time frame and with these certain rules that you can't do anything illegal, immoral, fiscally irresponsible, or whatever. And that's how that's the control we have. But I just to say we tell the superintendent what to do, we hold him accountable. That's pretty straightforward, and that's pretty much what policy governance does. It just gives you a more coherent plan of how to do that, rather than a shotgun approach of saying, well, I heard this from the first grade parents said this, and now I want to know why this is so. And instead of saying, we want first graders to be able to achieve this, we're going to ask you to show us the proof by this date. And if you do, good on you. If you don't, then we have to have a serious conversation. And that becomes part of your evaluation. So it's pretty easy to explain, I think, that it actually gives you more control. And I don't think the public has much of a sense of what the model is now. So
I agree, Jan. I also think, so I always kind of compare it to youth sports coaching. So, because that's part of my experience is that we all get it. We do youth sports coaching, but a lot of us never had any training in what's the proper techniques for coaching. So we just fall back on how we were coached. So if I had a baseball coach who just yelled at me and berated me and thought that was encouraging, then I might tend to be like that because I'm like, well, that's what my coach did, so that's what I'm going to try to do. And I think a lot of times our when you're running for the board, nobody ahead of time says, well, I'm going to take a couple years to study coherent governance and then I'm going to go run for the board. You just run for the board. You're not really sure how to be a board member. And I don't think also the public, I don't think understands, unless they are on a board, really what the board's role is. I think a lot of times the public sees us as a conduit to get things done. So they'll test Steve Tempest or they'll test Jan Berg and say, I wonder if I complain to Jan if she can get something done about my one issue. So I think it's a big expectation that it's going to suddenly kind of change, that this understanding is going to change. I think you just have to kind of roll with it. You have to know yourself as a board that you're doing the right thing. I think with our monitoring reports and demonstrating, we know we have measurable metrics. I don't know if you can ask for much more. Here, superintendent, here's some measurable things you have to achieve in this amount of time. I think anybody in the public would be happy to hear that. Now, the other thing is, I think sometimes some of our groups in the public are a little disappointed by that because they've been familiar with the other strategy that has worked well for them politically, that they can put pressure on through the board, that if the school district is doing something they don't like, well, then they go to the board and try to get leverage there. So I feel like this coherent governance has removed us from that leverage piece, but it's actually given us greater control of the superintendent. We had a superintendent, and for other reasons as well, but also for reasons of not quite understanding what our objective was, that then moved on, that wasn't around very long and moved on. And then we were able to find a superintendent who did get it and did understand that that's the priority, that what the board says is the priority, not the way he or she feels things should go.
Next up is Aaron Harder.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. Yes. Yeah. I just want to thank both of you for taking time to come and talk to us. I'm haven't served on the board very long, but I am the longest serving board member here, and as someone who's seen the board turn over quite a bit, I have been pretty in favor of this idea since we started talking about it. What you said earlier about board members coming in and coming from all kinds of different places, that's been my experience in terms of what they're prepared to do. I like coherent governance in the sense of sort of setting a framework and an expectation that we can all look at and understand. And I actually don't have a question, but I just wanted to say that. It's basically me saying I pass on the question. So thank you again for the time.
Yep.
Thanks. Next is Markwell Johnson.
I have no questions at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Phil Lyons.
Yeah, I do have a question. I was part of a group that helped craft the finance and the budget, the facilities and the asset management sides of coherent governance. And one of the things that we tried to do was take those big picture concepts that are in coherent governance and then attach those to some of the board policies. And what struck me is that the coherent governance framework is that big picture. These are the things that the superintendent is responsible for. But then you get into some of those board policies, and there's a lot of nuances and a lot of detail that I don't know where that fits. It's a board policy. And I remember one being, we were taking a look at some of the fundraising and those issues of the district's name and online fundraising, and then procurement amounts and insurance, and whether or not we should be 100% insured or self-insurance. And then it got to the point where it seemed like the board was making determinations that should really be back in the superintendent's. So what I was wondering is, from your experience, when the board does approach a policy or is writing a policy or adopting a policy or even reviewing a policy, is that reviewed through the coherent governance framework? And how do you do that when some of these board policies and rules that are important and need to be documented and written down get a little bit into the detail of the daily operation?
We have, we've divided things a bit. We have like procedures and regulations that the district needs by statute and to run the operation in one big binder. I mean, well, it's not a binder anymore, of course, it's a file on a server somewhere, but it used to be a doorstop, you could use it as a doorstop. It's like 3 inches thick. But all those procedures and stuff, the board has given to the superintendent and said, you enforce those. The board's policies are very streamlined and just deal with the really upper level stuff. How it gets implemented is the superintendent's purview. And it's easy to start drifting down into those details. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, if you can keep kicking up to higher levels, you're better off. I mean, the higher up you can go. The nice thing about policy governance is that sometimes they talk about nesting bowls. You have the large bowl and bowls inside, or those Russian dolls, there's always a little one further in there, but you always start at the biggest bowl you can. But if you need to go into more details because your community demands that you should know that, or it's let's say it's a pandemic time and you need to get a little bit more hands-on, you can always, through policy, go a little tighten up a little bit, or go a little into more details. But you want to stay in as big a bowl as you can. I don't know if that helps, but.
So one of the examples, I feel like I'm repeating myself, and I apologize for that, but one of the examples in our operational expectation of communicating with the public is our big statement is the superintendent shall assure that the public is adequately informed about the condition and direction of the district. Now, that would be way too loose. I mean, just to say, hey, here you go, good luck with that. So then it gets broken down. So we get the interpretation that the superintendent interprets what we mean by that, but then we break it down into a number of indicators that we maintain an online presence, and then we have measures within that so that we know just having a website doesn't mean that doesn't truly mean we're maintaining an online presence, that we have some metrics there that go with that. We regularly disseminate information to families through newsletters, community groups, whatever. The district utilizes the actual community groups for discussions, and we even identify what those community groups are. So it gets even greater. I mean, and so we have very specific things spelled out that the superintendent has to demonstrate to us in order for us to say you're compliant with communicating with the public. So if the superintendent comes back and isn't meeting those metrics, there may be reasons for that, and we'll listen to that. But if that's just something the superintendent chooses not to do, then we'd find them out of compliance on that issue. So it gives me great assurance. I mean, I know the feeling of thinking, wow, we're just kind of turning it all over to the superintendent. But with those monitoring reports, I feel great. And number one, I know exactly what the superintendent's doing and what we're holding him accountable for. And likewise, the superintendent knows what the expectation of the school board is. So if the superintendent came back and complied with all those things, and one of us school board members said, but I really think you should be at the football game at the gate, every Friday night. I didn't see you there was 3 home games I didn't see you at. Well, that's unfair because we didn't say that was one of the metrics of the measure of communicating with the public. So I think it's just a clear way of communicating what the expectations are.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm up next, and I want to just sort of follow on to the question that was just asked. One of the conversations that we've had, and as we look through sample policies for many different districts, we see, the board can change their policies at any time. And And I guess my question is, how often do you find yourself revising your policies? Does it happen? And this is one of the questions I had sent in beforehand. Does it happen regularly that you make tweaks or changes to adjust that? I know Jan had talked about, these larger meetings where you set direction and that will influence your results policies. Or does it happen often in sort of an emergency fashion where the board decides, oh, we have to get this switched right now out of sequence? I'd like to just hear about changing policies as you go along.
Well, we start out, we have an annual calendar so that we receive monitoring reports on a regular basis. And those monitoring reports reflect each of the policies. I mean, they come out of the policies. So whenever we get a monitoring report, we can review the policy to see whether we need to change it. If we don't think we're getting the information we need in the monitoring report, or we're not seeing the results that we think we need to be seeing, that would be when we would look at the policy and change it. Occasionally something comes up where it's like, oh, we really didn't think about having a policy on that, and now like, virtual meetings, never didn't come up until just recently. So we have more of a more refined policy, sort of an add-on to talk about joining meetings virtually and public participation in those types of meetings and stuff like that. But for the most part, the policies are broad enough, and the interpretation is where they get tightened up, and more so than rewriting the policy for the most part. If we're not getting the results we want to see, then it's more likely that the indicators aren't the right ones, or the metric isn't the right one, so that we would have a discussion about that, and which may or may not lead us back to the policy.
I would also recommend doing the hard work on the front end. For us, that's where I think that saved us a lot of time. I think the board did a great amount of work and both with original thinking and also with using some other examples from other districts, and then customizing them to ours. But I felt very comfortable with our monitoring and our policies, and then it's easy from there to do the tweaks and the adjustments that Jan suggests. But I would not say that we are constantly in emergency mode to change something. In fact, I would use that as a little bit of a red flag if we felt, because then that seems like we're being very reactive, that we're changing our expectations based on some event. And if the expectation is well thought out, I think that carries you through. It carries you through some of the events, or a concern from a community group or something. You say, well, we're staying the course. We're doing what we interpreted that we should do. So, but I would encourage doing a lot of hard work on the front end to get those where you want them.
Thanks. Next up is Erica Zur.
I guess I'll start with, I have two questions kind of lingering. I had really wordy questions. I don't know if you guys got my paragraphs worth of questions.
Yes.
But anyway, I think the thing that I have the most curiosity about right now in particular is the transition period that we as a board are. Not only are we going to go through it with our community, but we are going, there's these kind of recurring transition periods where the board is turning over. So as Aaron referenced, there's hardly a board member here with more than 2 years of experience. There's only a couple of them. And so we've got a really young board and a lot of catch up, and it's very possible that could happen again. where you've got, you know, a large majority of your members who come on with very little knowledge of the governance model under which the board operates. And so that transition is a concern. And how do you, I guess, specifically for board members transitioning onto the board who are not familiar with coherent governance, especially when we're new, right? Especially when this is like year 2, year 1, year 2, year 3, where they can still kind of see in their rearview mirror the way we used to do things, right? Where there was a lot more, a board member who had a specific agenda or had a, you know, a specific constituency group that they kind of represented, that were coming in with lots of, you know, wanting to speak really loudly for certain things. You know, kind of how you deal with education for new board members, how you build that camaraderie and that collaboration that's necessary on a board, especially around the governance model under which you work. But so that's one transition that I'm thinking of. But the other one is the transition that we're asking our community to go through. And this is like this has been a sticking point in my brain since the very beginning. Is I am an elected official, right? I have to go out and talk to the community and hear from them and hear what they want and what they see. And sure, maybe I can boil it, you know, down or move it into the right bowl, as Jan referenced, right? For like where that fits in the work that we do as a board. But right now, the community is very used to the board kind of having their fingers in things. And we're going to be striving really hard not to do that in a way. We're going to be putting it into the right category of work that we do. Yes, this is something that's important and it falls under this thing, right? But how do we deal with the transition with our community that we're going to go through here as board members without us all losing our jobs? You know, like, that's kind of where I'm falling.
So when a constituent asks you to fix something, what do you do?
Well, what do I do now? I'm the junior most board member, so I usually defer it to the senior most board member currently right now. That's what I do.
So you talk to a board member rather than the superintendent? I mean, if there's okay,
no,
so
almost entirely, yes. I mean, yeah, we are certainly communicating with superintendent immediately on any concern that is of significance, yes.
So nothing would change. A constituent talks to you about a problem, you talk to the superintendent. Superintendent needs to fix it. That's their job. You're not fixing it now. You're just telling somebody to fix it, right? I mean, it's all about I suppose how you spin it or whatever you want to say. But the reality is, right now, as a board member, you're saying, "I've heard this from a constituent. Fix it." You know, you need to fix this, and that's what would happen in policy governance or coherent governance too. If you hear a complaint, the chain of command, it's a superintendent's responsibility, and the only difference is it becomes part of his probably. There probably isn't any difference. It's still part of his evaluation or her evaluation. I mean, it has to, yeah, I don't know.
The only difference I would see there, Jan, would be when we hear things like character development or student achievement. So when a group or when the voice of the community says, you know, we see for the future that most of our students are going to need post-secondary education. So we see that in the future, our students should be prepared to enter post-secondary education once they leave our schools. So yeah, that one that one informs the board to say, let's make sure that what we're expecting and monitoring is that we're producing students who are prepared for, the majority of students are prepared for post-secondary education. And if not, then we're going to either change the superintendent or change the expectation to make sure that they are, because the community values that. But when somebody complains to me that the swing set only has 3 swings on and it should have 4 because the kids have to line up it. I'm not going to handle that. I'm not going to deal with that. That's the superintendent can deal with that. I mean, that's a rather simplistic example, but those day-to-days, where is the bus stop, that kind of stuff, that we have expectations that the superintendent's going to communicate with the public and meet the public needs, and we're going to let the superintendent figure that out. I think we need to be responsive to the values of the community, not necessarily the checklist of daily complaints.
Right.
All right, so next we'll move to Superintendent Johnson.
Well, thanks, Jan and Steve, for your time. We talked about this briefly in late December, right before our winter break. And I guess the one thing that came up was, there's a lot on my shoulders or any superintendent's shoulders in a coherent governance model. But is there somewhat of a recognized balance that you experienced in DeForest, whether it was with your present superintendent or with John Bales? Is there a balance that you've maybe experienced between my communication with district and school administrators' autonomy, and sometimes teachers, and perceived micromanaging by me? Just wondering about that.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I guess because there's so much, Jan, because there's so much on, responsibility on the superintendent's plate. How did you navigate that in DeForest? I'm assuming John Bales probably didn't go into an English classroom in your middle school and say, you know what, our English scores are low. You need to teach this a little differently, let's say. Was there a balance that you had or that John had with his principals and his directors so that it wasn't perceived as micromanaging?
Well, I think it's it's modeling, I guess. So the way the superintendent gets treated by the board is the way the superintendent should treat his administrators, and once again set expectations and fence posts and let them do their job. I mean, I think that's, but with the idea that, it's one of those things that what gets measured is what gets done, so that if everybody in the district knows what the results we're aiming for and the superintendent communicates that clearly to his principals, the principals can communicate that clearly to the teachers, so everybody knows why we're aiming this way and why we are emphasizing, let's say, early literacy or whatever it is, because that is a value that the community has spoken on, and we want to see these scores raised in the next 2 years, and we need to have proof that we're doing it, and we know we can do it. And teachers are empowered in their classroom to get results, and principals are empowered in their buildings to do that, just like the superintendent is empowered to get the results that the board and the community has said they want.
So that magic that you talk about, Mike, I think we kind of refer to that as alignment. And I'm not quite familiar with how that happens, but the superintendent works very hard to take what our expectations are, and it's taken some time. I think it's not always an instantaneous process. For example, we were seeing pockets of reading scores and math scores that weren't up to expectation, so in different grade levels. And so there was work done internally with teams of teachers who would get together and collaborate and say, let's make sure we're being consistent with what we're teaching. There were materials that were selected for greater gains in those areas for having students catch up. But also there was requests through the superintendent to approve additional staff in the form of learning coaches, I think is what we call them, at those levels to target that specific expectation. So to me, that I think that's sort of the picture of what we call alignment, that the activities of the district align to what the board expects. And then what the board is expecting, of course, is reflective of what the community experience is. So I think that
And I would add that as part of the monitoring reports is there's sort of a capacity building section too, so that if, like Steve was saying, that we can't get the scores up without additional help, like we need instructional coaches, well, then that comes as a capacity building thing. That comes back, when they're building a budget and when the district financial person is building the budget and the board says, well, what are you doing about that? We need to make sure this happens. And because we're trying to align the district, money can follow those things too, which helps make things happen.
If you don't mind, if I can just go back to one point, I think it's sort of important as far as it seems like more of a school board thing or just in general, but I think it's really important for coherent governance. And one of the previous board members said she only had 2 years experience. And I don't think that's the proper perspective, because your value to the board isn't how many years you've been on the board, but rather what you bring to the board. So a brand new board member is just as valuable as a veteran board member, because they bring their community connections, their experience. They probably had family members go. They bring that value to the board. They also bring things like they're good collaborators. They know how to have a debate and come to consensus. Those are the values. So no matter if you have 6 months or 10 years, that isn't as important as the other things you bring to the board. And for the coherent governance, we spend a lot of time talking to each other, trying to create consensus as to what we value and the community values.
Thanks. Well, that takes us around our board and our superintendent for questions. And I see we have about 7 minutes left if we're going to honor the hour that we had asked you to commit to. So first I want to just give a chance back to Commissioners Harder and Johnson. If there's a question that has come up, you passed in the first point. So if either of you have a question you'd like to add at this point.
I do not have a question at this particular point. Let's get on. I'm struggling to. I'm still a detractor here. I'm struggling to even buy into the coherent governance model as a whole. So I think the continuous feedback and eventually it looks like it's going to be a third read of this book that was given to me on coherent governance. Yeah, thank you.
I think it's valuable to be to take an objective look at coherent governance. I don't think it's something you can just accept and say, "Yep, that's the way we're going to do it." I think it is valuable because I think it forces you to think a little bit about your principles as far as what my job is and what I came into this job with. So I respect that. I think that's a good place to start, to think through that and to because I think that lets you look really carefully at some of those questions you might have, and then that allows you to ask the right questions when you're making your decision.
So maybe sorry, Commissioner Harder, did you have a question?
I did not. I was just going to pass.
Oh, sorry. So I think maybe by way of closing, Jan and Steve, if you could give advice from your own experience, what are some hurdles that you had to cross as you transitioned from your prior governance to coherent governance, or what are some advice from a board that is entering into this that you would give to us as we consider moving forward with this work?
Well, I guess I wouldn't do it by myself. I would, well, many years ago, a couple decades ago now, I think when we first started down this road, we used the what was then the Colorado Association School Board. They had a couple of trainers, Linda Dawson and Randy Quinn, and they've since gone off on their and become their own consulting business. But and they're expensive, and they may be worth it. They probably are, but they have a very clear way of talking about what coherent governance is. They have a very engaging, interactive way of creating the policies so that you can go through a workshop with them and come away with policies, with your policies pretty much written. A lot of it's boilerplate because there's not a lot of differences at the highest level between school districts. You can always put your personal district spin on things, but I would recommend, if not hiring them to help you through the process, at least if you could attend a workshop with them, it might be of value. Because we certainly didn't do it all by ourselves. We've had help, and we retrain with them on a fairly regular basis. WASDA, I think John Bales has brought them in once or twice, I think. The Dane County school districts that practice policy coherent governance are also have brought them in, and it's an opportunity to meet the real experts. They live and breathe it and dream it probably, but it very much helps you get through the writing of the policies. It really helps get it implement. It gets you to implementation, I guess. What do you think, Steve?
Well, I have sort of a list here of advice. But to start, I just wanted to mention that. So I'm on the board of a human service agency in Dane County, and it's a smaller board. We don't use policy governance, and I wish we did. I think we make a lot of snap decisions based on our mood, and I don't think we provide any value to the director of the agency that we are on the board of. I think our director deals with us and tolerates us, but she knows what she should be doing, so she does it. So I don't feel like I'm as effective there as I am on the school board. My day job, I work with the technical college boards in the state of Wisconsin. So there's 16 technical colleges, and they have a few different versions of governance, and some successful and some not so successful. And I think there's probably examples of technical college presidents who just sort of deal with their board and know what they're supposed to be doing. And then there's other boards who really add value to what they're doing. So with that perspective, there's a couple of things, because I came on the board 15 years ago with the school board, and they were already engaged in what we called policy governance. Then we refined it to the coherent governance, which I think was a good improvement. But a couple things just to reiterate what Jan said: get help, ask for some consultation with somebody. I think that makes your work a little easier. I think it was Trustee Johnson just mentioned, I think asking those questions, being critical, I think that's very helpful. The other thing on the board that we find once we've implemented is we have some helpful reminders to each other of, hey, you might be getting into the weeds a little bit too far. We don't need to hear that. Also, in our monitoring report, there's a term called wing flapping, and we're looking for actual results, not for what we call wing flapping, which is, well, we've scheduled 6 meetings to talk about student achievement. Well, that's wing flapping, that's a good thing, but what we want to know is where the student achievement is. So we have some helpful reminders that we give each other. We have cheat sheets for when we're reviewing monitoring reports, because we don't want to pretend we're experts because there's just too much here to understand. So we've used those to a great degree to help us, I think, be successful. The other thing I always tell people when they're critical of coherent governance, I just say, if it didn't work for our board, we wouldn't do it. It's not like some sort of club we're in or anything. If it doesn't work, if we felt like it wasn't working for us, then we wouldn't do it. I think the other bit of advice is, if it's advice, is I think you'll feel like when you walk out of a board meeting, I think you'll feel like you added value with a coherent governance model. I think you feel like you've done something and that you've added great value to the district.
Well, Jen and Steve, I think I can say for all of us that you've added value to our discussion here tonight.
Good.
Thank you for taking time out of your holiday to help us in this process to answer our questions. I'm certain that there are many more that we could pelt you with all night. And we'll certainly be in contact for our March session as well. But thank you for being here tonight. On behalf of all of us, it was really great to have you.
Thank you.
It was really an honor to be asked. Good luck to you guys.
Yeah,
Cheers.
good luck. Okay, bye-bye.
So at this time, we will move into our committee reports. The next item on our agenda is the discussion and possible first reading of policy 852. By way of introduction, I will turn it over to Superintendent Johnson, who worked with our district legal counsel in coming up with this policy.
Thank you. As Dr. Nordin had stated, the policy language that attorney Steve Wells' firm had drafted for us is not necessarily, this is not a model policy through WASB or any other single source. It's simply a hybrid of the language from a few sources that our attorney had guided us in, and along with some wholly original language that he had developed. We discussed this a bit at our P&G meeting last Tuesday. We asked about which number should be assigned to the new policy as well, and he had stated that it makes sense for a policy to be located where surrounding policies address similar issues. As we all know, the 800 series is a bit of a variety pack of different community relations issues, so we wanted to place it as 852 as we felt it was the most appropriate placement, especially after advertising, which is 851. I'd like to have Abby Johnson discuss just very briefly a couple examples of how this had emerged. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Johnson. A couple of things have kind of come up over the last several years, and we learned that we really didn't have definite language and policies, so that's why you have the policy in front of you tonight. Some of those examples revolve around athletic camp experiences. There was a period of several years ago when Mr. Schmidt and I worked with putting summer school camps or athletic camps into summer school to remove some barriers that perhaps children would have and be able to participate and attend. And so not everybody was super supportive of that. And so, we learned that there were some events that were being held off of district property, but they were still kind of advertising that it was a district camp and gave the appearance that it was a district camp by using the logo or the school name or things like that. And so that was one experience that we had. We worked through it and were able to, have the information updated so it didn't appear to be a district activity. So that was probably the first time that we talked about that in depth. Another thing came up earlier this year, and it really came around with our relationship with the city county health department and related to some of the testing sites and things like that within the district. And so, anytime we put our logo or our mascot, there's an appearance that the school district is a partner or has approved it, and that's not always the case. And so even this fall, when we developed a partnership with the City County Health, really looking at what does it mean to the public or a community member when our logo is on there or a letterhead is on there. And so again, does that give the appearance that we're supportive or endorsing or things like that? And so wanting to be clear and intentional about when we're using those items. And then the last one really is a little bit more recent, and it relates to elections. And so again, kind of coming back to that endorsing of a candidate. And so if a candidate uses our logo, the district logo on advertising or websites or things like that, what does that say from a community perspective? And does that give the appearance that we're endorsing a candidate, which we can't do? Law tells us that we can't do that. And so those were just 3 examples that we wanted to specifically share with the board, and why we feel it's important for you to be reviewing this policy in front of you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. So, P&G, of course, talked about this at a meeting last week. We didn't have it ready in time for our prior meeting. We felt that the language was fine here. If there are no objections, I will just read the policy and then we can discuss what we'd like to do with that. So, policy 852, use of school district trademarks. The names, logos, symbols, mottos, and mascots of the district are trademarks of the district. As such, the district is the sole and exclusive owner of said names, logos, symbols, mottos, and mascots. Such marks may only be used in conformance with state and federal law and the provisions of this policy. Faculty, staff, and students of the district may use the above-mentioned names, logos, symbols, or mottos on internal documents or materials for internal business or educational purposes only. Any such conduct will be in accordance with applicable law, board policies, administrative regulations, handbooks, and codes of conduct. Use of the district's trademarks for any retail or commercial purpose for endorsements, promotions, or similar endeavors requires the express written permission of the district. Requests for such use shall be made in writing and submitted to the district administrator's office. The district reserves the right to reject any request to use the district's trademarks for any non-discriminatory reason. If permission is granted, use of the district's trademarks will be in accordance with any terms agreed upon by the board or its designee, and the individual or entity authorized to use such marks. Said individuals or entities will have permission to use the trademarks only in the manner described in the approved application. Any additional uses will require a separate application and permission prior to use. Use of the above-mentioned names, logos, symbols, or mottos does not constitute permission to act as the district's agent, official, or representative. In order to avoid public perception that the district is endorsing any particular political viewpoint, the district's trademarks shall not be used in any publication or communication advocating for the election or defeat of any political candidate and/or promoting or opposing political purposes, viewpoints, or parties. So this time I'm happy to open the floor to comments and discussion. Commissioner Zerr.
I just have a question about, can you say a little bit more about the discussion, how the discussion evolved around how staff and students may use the logos? So for internal business or educational purposes, would that be like for clubs and things that the students are organizing themselves? Would they be able to use it, or would there be some ambiguity? Would our students be able to still access school logos for, like, let's say Student Senate or something along those lines?
Do you want me to answer?
Sure.
Typically, what our guideline, for example, for facility use is if it's a school-sponsored event, then they have the same kind of privileges or rights as staff. Like a principal scheduling high school graduation, they get priority scheduling within facility use. So school-sponsored in that circumstance indicates either it's an approved activity or athletic event. So for example, we schedule those earlier than we do the others, or it's a student-based group, but they have a faculty advisor. So it's considered school-sponsored if there's a faculty advisor along with the group. So Student Senate, as an example, will have a faculty advisor, or lots of other groups will have a faculty advisor, and that would then allow them access kind of as if it were a school-sponsored or district-sponsored event or club.
So Kim, if I'm understanding right, the short answer is yes, students who are participating in school-sponsored clubs and activities will be able to use the logos and whatnot.
Right.
Thank you.
But,
No.
oh, sorry, go ahead, Lori. Well, just a follow-up to it. So, for example, if a student is going to do a fundraiser for some group at school, now whether that is a personal endeavor, or maybe it's for to go on a trip someplace, and they want to tack on the school district logo or the school logo, the school mascot or something like that, but it's not necessarily for, I just want to make sure that the language is clear enough that it protects our students who might step in something that they don't necessarily know they're stepping into. You know what I mean? That's kind of my concern, is I don't want them to get themselves in some sort of like trouble, because I want the language to be clear enough. And so I just wondered if you guys discussed student use and kind of where the lines would be drawn and how we would communicate the lines to students.
Dr. Vika, did you want to add on before we?
And I guess specifically too, I'm wondering about student political clubs. So we have our student Democrats, student Republicans.
I think there'd be both care and concern in both of those situations, because the first would require, even though let's just say it's a joint North Memorial, even though it's in school, if you look at the second paragraph, students can use it for internal business or educational purposes only. Yet if it's a fundraiser, that would be another level where they would need to take it to my level, or a district administrator or his or her designee. The second, Commissioner Vika, the same type of thing for any political viewpoints as well. That's that last paragraph there too. So Kim, if you want to share anything else with that too.
Yeah, I think in most cases, if it's a school-sponsored, for example, a school-sponsored fundraiser, again, there would be an adult attached to it. If it's an individual fundraiser, I'm just coming in as a student and would like to raise funds for something, then that probably wouldn't be allowed. They would need to work with an adult in the school in order for it to be school-sponsored.
And on that, Kim, I don't imagine it's the district's intent to send a student who does that out of just trying to do the fundraising, a letter from the attorney and saying, here's your summons, right? Superintendent Johnson just said, care and concern. So I imagine that there would just be a conversation with that student as the first step and working with them at that point, right?
Of course.
Oh, go ahead, Dr. Vika.
I guess I'm still not clear on how this policy impacts the student political clubs.
Tim, do you know, as a high school principal, do they have an advisor, like Young Republicans, Young Democrats?
Typically they do. They have some staff member that, whether it's implemented or not, there's usually someone that.
Dr. Vika, with that question, is it more using the district logo, or would it be a school logo for their campaign materials? For example, a memorial or a North student using it for, let's say, a student council.
I don't know what they do, but I could imagine any of the above appearing with, just like any other student club, on a newsletter or a sweatshirt or anything really.
I would hesitate, I would like to ask, with most policies, whenever there seems to be a question, in my experiences at the district level, when we ask about procedures, we usually contact the principals. I think in this case, for example, if our students use the district logo in a campaign material, and let's say two of the other candidates did not, one could assume that the district really wanted the one student to receive the votes and win the election. So that's where I think it becomes a difficult situation there. That's about the only thing I'd like to ask in terms of procedure, how the student elections work, what types of campaign materials are they able to post or place on social media, those types of things first, because like in any election, if one of them had it on and two of them didn't, it could be perceived that one is receiving that favor when the others aren't.
So I think for me, I'll get to you next, Dr. Johnson. I think the question comes down for me on that, and this is not something that we talked about in P&G. We were, the discussion was all mostly around adults or corporations using it, so this was not part of our discussion, so this is a new topic. Specifically, if you have a, Memorial High School Democrats or Memorial High School Republicans, and they want to have a t-shirt that says that, and it says, Memorial High School Democrats, and it has the Old Abe logo on there. The language in there does seem to indicate, that they can't put that on there because of endorsing a particular political viewpoint, the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. But it also says that students can use it for student activities. So I think that I'm less concerned about students running for student council, although certainly that I think it applies here, but it's less clear when it's specifically on these political clubs. So I think that's the question that came to mind. And I see Dr. Vika, and then after that we'll go to Dr. Johnson. We'll go to you. So I guess I'm not clear on how that would work just on face value. So Dr. Johnson, do you have something you want to add in on this?
I guess for a point of clarification, I guess where I would disagree or not see it in the same sense as Dr. Vika, Dr. Nordin, a Memorial Democrat or a Memorial Republican, that's internal use because it only matters to those particular students at that school. So it's an internal use perspective. So that would be fine. So in your view, one would actually assign that Memorial Democrats or Memorial Republicans only matters to the Memorial students at their school. That's internal. It carries no other bearing outside externally, just that it's actually, they have an affinity to that particular group, to their high school. So I would view it as that. And I would say that the policy addresses internal use favorably for those students. It would not be an issue. And so, I guess where you could continue to, what did our other meeting, wing flapping, I guess, we could potentially go, that was an interesting terminology, but we could wing flap. I think there's a whole lot of ways, but for me, student clubs who create t-shirts are student clubs who campaign. Once again, it's internal. The vote only matters within a school, within a high school. That makes sense. You're running for your club, and that political affiliation within that club is only within that high school for that club. It has no bearing externally. So I guess for me, the huge piece in this policy and in the conversation, it was that external piece outside of the scope of the district itself is where the issues arise. And so how, I think given our current climate, politically I could see, but however, I would not take any offense to any student wearing a North Republican student club shirt. They're a student at North who affiliates in that particular club. therefore that makes sense. I don't say like, oh, you can't do that at a school district. Well, the school district does approve because the school district has clubs with those affiliations. That's internal use. So this policy in the discussion was that external use to greater community, potentially those outside. Now, you know, Commissioner Zer's point, I guess I potentially would take a little bit issue with individual fundraising, having to potentially get a greater approval. But if it's, you know, if it's faculty led, then I guess you kind of cover the bases. But if it's an individual student trying to utilize, you know, school, then I think that would need further discussion. But the political affiliation pieces, because those political student groups are internally affiliated with those particular schools and recognize this policy would not actually impact that at all. And so that would be my interpretation, which would potentially different than some of the comments that were made before.
I just had not made that particular connection to how that fit in. So that was helpful to hear your viewpoint. Thank you. For me. Go ahead, Commissioner Zer.
How are these normally monitored? So when there's a new policy that we're putting out there, so it's just one of those things. I guess I just don't know. Like, if Superintendent Johnson or you know, exec team members, if you went out and were experiencing lots and lots of problems with how this is being interpreted or unwittingly violated, like, you know, just unknowingly violated, and you're having a lot of students having issues or staff having issues, and we needed to change the language, you would propose bringing it back to P&G with some to amend the language because it wasn't quite working the right way, right? That's the normal procedure for how this would come back to us if something wasn't working, correct?
I think that's correct. It could be that, actually, Commissioners, or simply it could be the policy is fine, but yet we're not following our procedures. So the situations that have been brought up this evening, I think, are all valid and could very well happen. What I think we need to do in our district, and I think it really does help, is, for example, when we have like a system leader type meeting after a board meeting, to then share with our administrators. For example, we just had a policy come forth with a first reading and then a second reading, and once it's approved, here it is. And we need to talk with you a little bit about the procedures for student elections, internal types of communication with whether it's advertising for student clubs, or what's the procedure when a student would like to maybe do this on the outside of the school district for a fundraiser. What types of, you know, protocols and procedures do you have? It probably is one or the other. That's part of that coherent governance model, is that if we're really having problems with a policy, then either I need to share that with you and we need to change the policy, but probably most importantly and more immediate would be, why are our administrators and our staff members and our students not following the policy, first of all? So I think one of the two could happen. I wouldn't necessarily immediately put it back on P&G to have to develop the policy. I do that in concert, or we would do that in concert with speaking with our administrators first, because ultimately they're the ones who need to follow it to run our district.
Dr. Johnson.
I just had one follow-up in terms of just some potential editing. Could I potentially, I was just curious, I did not recognize this before split as I was reading during P&G, but was there a reason why mascot fell off after the first paragraph? So everything else now says or model or models instead of models and mascot. So I'm just, or is that not really that significant of a piece?
I also didn't notice that in the read, and I think it's something that we could easily, if we were okay with the policy in general, we could say, you know, approve it. You know, we could ask for that to be added. You know, and I think that's worth adding, and then we could just move it forward without a major revision. So it's just adding that word. Thank you, Commissioner Harder.
Yeah, it's relating to the discussion from a few minutes ago about T-shirts, and I guess I feel there's a little bit of ambiguity about what constitutes internal in that case. A T-shirt is, you know, you're wearing it around. I think of, you know, posters up inside the school. Hey, we're meeting at 4:30 on Thursday. Yeah, that's internal. T-shirts, to me, that I feel like maybe there's some ambiguity with this. Perhaps, again, it comes out in rules and in discussions and doesn't need to be in this policy, but that was just a point that came to mind.
So hearing no additional discussion, are we okay to put this forward to a vote at our next meeting? Or is there objection and it needs to be sent back for additional work? So hearing none, we'll put it on the consent agenda for next time. If anyone would like it as an individual item, just contact me ahead of time and we can move that for our agenda setting. We'll now move to our individually considered resolution for the evening. That's the consideration of the 2021 WASB resolutions. My apologies for having this as an item tonight and was needing to act on it immediately. I did ask all of the board members to read the proposed policy.
President Nordine?
Yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. Just because we had adjourned to committee, I do need a formal motion to reconvene the regular meeting so the board can vote.
Yes, thank you for reminding me. I do see that on the agenda and just sort of skipped over it. So I would like to hear a motion to reconvene the regular meeting at this time.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Now we'll reconvene. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. So I did ask all of the members to review the proposed resolutions for the WASB. I'm not 100% sure how we want to go through this. My idea for tonight is to go through one by one and to just ask if there is discussion. And then if there is discussion, of course, we can discuss. We will need, what I would like then and what we need is simply a vote to either, you know, a vote with ECASD's delegate vote to approve the resolution or to vote against the resolution. So that will be the motion that is needed, and we'll just, if there's not a lot of discussion on some of these, which hopefully there won't be, then we'll go quickly, and then when we need to discuss, we can take the time. We'll just go through them. I think it makes most sense to just go through one at a time. So we'll start with resolution 21-01. That's the 1 cent sales tax for school infrastructure, technology, and tax relief. Are there comments, questions, or a motion on this particular item? So, yeah, Dr. Vika.
Do you know, is there a longer form of these resolutions anywhere that you found?
So these are the resolutions that will be voted on. They are modeled after resolutions that boards across the state send in. And then those boards, there's a process to send that in, from what I understand. They go then to the WASB committee, the resolution committee, who evaluates them, makes their own changes, and then produces what is here. So these are the text of the actual resolutions. So example, create there, that is the text that will be voted on. There are they may be the same or different from the resolution that was sent in by a participant district. Now I can see, for example, this one came off of, this was Hudson submitted this particular resolution in the first place. I could not tell you off the top of my head if it's substantially different, although it says, yes, it does say that there were modifications that the delegate committee made. But I think I sent that along as well in your materials, the list, the actual resolutions, a big scan through document when I sent so they were available to see how they had changed. For example, the final one, number 10, is very different than what the sponsor district sent in.
I'm sorry, may I ask, did you say you emailed or?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I'll look.
Okay, it was in the same one that had both. It had the actual, because I had the electronic copy of the resolutions as we're looking at tonight, and then I had done a scan of the materials. I couldn't find that on the WASB website, but that they sent to me as the delegate, and so I scanned them as a PDF. I did see commissioners, you're nodding that you did in fact get that, or no? Okay, I was just looking for confirmation that it went through. I can help look it up.
I was more nodding in my own
Okay, that's fine.
understanding of something.
Commissioner Clements.
Yes, about resolution 2101, 1 cent sales tax for school infrastructure. And I don't know if you're intending to debate each of these in great detail. However, I'm concerned about this one. Sales tax receipts are very uneven throughout the state. And I think the districts that are, I'm all for having more revenue streams and funding for public education, but places like Hudson and Eau Claire, for that matter, outperform most of the rest of the state on sales tax revenue per capita. So there's a statement here that says this on line 19 is intended to provide an equitable designed funding for all public schools. I don't know that it does that. I think it actually creates greater disparities geographically across the state. Not that property taxes are a perfect source either, but I don't know if this one has been carefully thought through.
Dr. Johnson.
I would concur. This is one of the ones I thought we were just going to vote for each resolution up or down, and so if we're having debate, I'm also against 01. In addition to Commissioner Clements' comments, also the thing that bothers me the most is on line 22. This tax should remain in place for a long enough period. You ask individuals of the great state of Illinois about toll bridges that were actually supposed to be temporary, and we're still, going through tolls to this day. So I'm not sure, and given the current economic climate, to tell or to promote or support an additional tax on individuals that have been impacted economically would not make sense. So I would not be in favor of 2101. So.
Commissioner Zer.
Yeah, I would agree. I think this is the spirit of it is fine. I understand that we need more money for our school districts, and I want to support just about any effort to get that. But if it creates being a rural kid from a small town, we watched a lot of money go to big cities for education and a lot of money not come to us. And so that was my big, objection to this was how it could potentially impact some districts and not others. And being one of the larger districts, I think we have nothing probably but to gain from a policy like this. And, but I also think that we need to, if we're going to support something, it should be something that is truly equitable for our neighbors as well.
I'm going to disagree with all three of you. I do support this, and I think the reason why is right there in line 20. It says distributed on a per student basis. So if Burnett County, has a lower tax income, each student in Burnett County is going to be allocated the same amount. So if Eau Claire overperforms, then students in Burnett County are going to, now granted, Eau Claire with 11,000 students will receive 11,000 times whatever the allocation is. And Burnett County with presumably far, far fewer, knowing that this is going to receive fewer overall dollars, but each student will get the same amount. So where the sales tax is collected in this does not reflect to me where that money is going to go. It's going to go per student. So, I'm going to vote in support of it, but of course, again, whatever we decide, that's how I will actually vote at the delegate assembly. But that's why I do support it. And I think it also allows us to take advantage of people coming from out of state to help to fund that, because when people buy gas or other products here in the state, that's money that's coming from out of state to support our students. And the same way that Iowa and Illinois do the same thing. And whether it's, you can argue about tolls, but I have to pay that toll every time I go to Chicago as well, and that money goes there. So that's my feeling on it. And I don't, maybe I have the wrong perspective, but a per student allocation doesn't disadvantage people in counties that I don't think that collect less of that revenue, because it's just collected into a big pool and then allocated out per person. Commissioner Lyons.
Tim, more from a process question. When the delegates get together at WASB, is there any ability on the floor to change these and modify them? I just wonder about the process. I agree with you that we need funding. I think asking for a 1% sales tax is enormous. I think 1% sales tax is a 0.25% would feel easier on my mind. I would be interested on a 1% across the entire state sales tax, how much that might bring in. And if that, the state has a whole number of mouths to feed, and how that might impact roads or construction or universities or, the like. So those are my thoughts.
Sure. I haven't participated in the WASB Delegate Assembly before. I will read you what I was sent. I will be attending the sort of pre-assembly tomorrow just to get a sense of what's going on, but I will read you verbatim what's in there about amendments. Amendments to resolutions shall be presented in writing with the name of the presenting delegate's district and shall be emailed to appropriate WASB staff or typed into the software's chat box feature. Amendments must be germane to the resolution and are limited to the scope of the presented resolution. Resolutions denominated as technical resolutions shall not be subject to amendment by the delegate assembly. I don't think there are any technical resolutions in this. So there is an opportunity to make amendments if we want. Commissioner Clements.
Thank you. So I didn't scrutinize this, I guess, far enough ahead of time, but the way that it's written says that it would be a statewide 1-cent tax to be distributed per student. However, it says district electors would need to approve a one-time revenue purpose statement before those sales tax funds could be extended. And then it provides essentially a very narrow, in effect, would be a very narrow purpose for this revenue, not supplies, hiring additional staff, or employee and salaries and benefits. And I think I guess is intended to work towards infrastructure and essentially, but and technology. But then it's supposed to be as a new ongoing revenue stream for the stated purposes, and should not be used by the legislature. I mean that word "should" is problematic, and line 21. It should be and shall not be used by the legislature, because as we know, the legislature has a way of raiding funds if they're not protected. And so I would fully anticipate that this could be made permanent as a way to score political points to lower property taxes. So I think it's just problematic the way that it's being proposed. And if this issue of school funding needs to get unraveled in a little bit more thoughtful way, then I'm concerned about what this potential funding tool would be used and how it would be used.
And I'd just like to remind everyone that these are not laws that are going forward. This is what WASB will advocate for. And so any applicable laws that would be drafted out that would then go through the normal process. So that is not to say that these ideas are not good ones, but I just want us to not get caught up in, we're not setting this down. We're just saying that we want WASB to either advocate for this or not advocate for this in the coming year. But there's a whole lot more that would go into it. It would just be for that purpose. So go ahead, Dr. Johnson.
So moving forward, as we go through the remainder of these resolutions, and given in light of the members from the force, I guess for all of us, it's a cue to, this is the kind of reminder for us not to wing flap as we go through the remainder of the resolution, since we're still on one. So I would, if no more discussion, I would move just to vote on how you as a delegate would represent 2101. We could.
Sure. Would you like to make a motion?
I make a motion to vote on 2101. The one cent sales tax for school infrastructure, technology, and tax relief.
Sure. What would you like the motion to actually? But we can call it. Would you want to? Do you want us to vote to approve it or to deny it?
Approve or deny.
Right. So I'm asking you. You need to make that motion about what way you want to go with it, and then we'll take that question up.
All right. I make the motion to deny support for resolution 2101.
All right. So the motion has been made to reject support on resolution 2101. Is there a second?
Second.
Just for clarity's sake, I think it's probably better to just do a roll call. And as I'm rethinking this, is it better to have a standard motion and just to, if the motion fails, then maybe. I apologize for my, well, we have a motion and it's seconded. So in this case, a vote of yes indicates that we will vote no against it. It's kind of the reverse. And a vote of no indicates that we want to vote yes for this particular one.
Commissioner Tippett?
Thank you.
Yes.
Commissioner Harder?
No.
Commissioner Lyons?
Yes.
Commissioner Nordin?
No.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Commissioner Zur?
Yes.
Commissioner Vika?
No.
So by my count, the vote was 4-3 in favor of rejecting this resolution. All right, I do agree with you, Dr. Johnson, that I think it's important that we get a chance to, if we have something that we want to say, but I don't know that we necessarily need to spend a lot of time debating it. So you can also feel free to just make a motion right away. Maybe it's easier going forward, so I don't have to cross up the vote in my mind. If the standard motion is to approve, and then if it fails, we will just know that we vote no on that one. I think that will make it easier for me going forward if people don't mind. Number 2 is resolution 2102 is broadband access. Discussion or a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve resolution
Second.
2102.
Commissioner Lyons, I believe you seconded.
I did.
Any discussion on the motion? I wonder if you would sort of cycle the roll call so that Commissioner Vika is not always at the end, maybe knowing that her vote is not necessarily a decider, so that if we could just cycle on each of these.
Sure. Commissioner Harder? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Commissioner Harder?
Sorry, I'm having trouble with my mute button. Yes.
Commissioner Lyons,
Yes.
Commissioner Nordine,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Zur,
Yes.
Commissioner Vika,
Yes.
Commissioner Clements.
Yes.
Next one is 2103, enrollment hold harmless. I will make the motion to approve this. Is there a second? Approved and seconded. Any discussion? Then I will call the question.
Commissioner Lyons,
Yes.
Commissioner Nordine,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Zur,
Yes.
Commissioner Vika,
Yes.
Commissioner Clements,
Yes.
Commissioner Harder.
Yes.
Thank you. Resolution 2104, Instruction on Indigenous Tribes, 1989, Wisconsin Act 31.
I move to approve.
Second.
Discussion on the motion. Call the question.
Commissioner Nordine,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Zur,
Yes.
Commissioner Vika,
Yes.
Commissioner Clements,
Yes.
Commissioner Harder,
Yes.
Commissioner Lyons.
Yes.
Resolution 2105, Special Education Flexibility to Address Emergencies.
I move support for resolution 2105.
Moved and seconded. Discussion on the motion.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch who seconded.
Commissioner Zur, I believe.
Thank you.
Seeing none, call the question.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes. Yes.
Commissioner Zur,
Yes.
Commissioner Vika,
Yes.
Commissioner Clements,
Yes.
Commissioner Harder,
Yes.
Commissioner Lyons,
Yes.
Commissioner Nordine.
Yes. Resolution 2106, Assessment and Report Card Waivers. I will move to approve assessment and report card waivers 2106.
Second.
Seconded by Dr. Vika. Is there discussion on the motion? Call the question.
Commissioner Zur,
Yes.
Commissioner Vika,
Yes.
Commissioner Clements,
Yes.
Commissioner Harder,
Yes.
Commissioner Lyons,
Yes.
Commissioner Nordine,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson.
Yes.
Resolution 2107, rehiring retired teachers and staff.
Second.
Moved by Zur, second by Harder. Is there discussion on the motion? Call the question.
Commissioner Vika,
Yes.
Commissioner Clements,
Yes.
Commissioner Harder,
Yes.
Commissioner Lyons,
Yes.
Commissioner Nordine,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Zur.
Yes.
Resolution 2108, superintendent evaluations. I'll motion to approve.
Second.
Is there discussion on this resolution? Call the question.
Commissioner Clements,
Yes.
Commissioner Harder,
Yes.
Commissioner Lyons,
Yes.
Commissioner Nordine,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
No.
Commissioner Zur,
Yes.
Commissioner Vika.
Yes.
Resolution 2109, comprehensive school safety legislation.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion on the motion. Dr. Johnson.
Yeah, I guess for me, I'll be voting against this. For me, it's interesting that as part of Part A, that this inclusion of continuing the hiring of SROs without actually delineating the specific roles that SROs play in our particular school is a little bit too much for me to until we have, I think, further clarification moving forward. I think as a district, we're going to have to talk about that, and hopefully at PNG we can begin to have conversations as well. But for me, it's just really throwing in item I, or what's on line 35, the hiring of SROs. If you look at the current trend across the United States, it's actually not hiring of more SROs. It's designating of particular roles that SROs, if any, that they play within at least our public schools. So thank you.
Could
Commissioner Reserve.
I would vote against this without an amendment, without a proposed amendment to remove Section A, Part 2. That's what I'd like to do.
Dr. Vika.
I might have some concerns about Section A. The first point, the security improvements, not knowing more, is that a movement toward kind of the zero tolerance environment. So thinking about things that are not supported by evidence in the physical environment. I have a question about that as well. Obviously, there are really important, so mental health services, crisis teams, de-escalation, all of this is really important, but that point 1 and 2, it's just too uncertain to me.
I'll say I feel the same, and at the same time, to my mind, it allows local districts to make their choices on how they would be funding available to do those things. And so I wouldn't necessarily support, number 2. Number 1, we did just recently secure entrances on all of our facilities. And obviously there's different ways to do that. The SROs I also have some concerns with. I'm personally okay approving this and allowing that, and when it came to local decision, that's when I would want to have more input on how it was used. But I'm also okay with, offering, if we wanted to amend this current motion to ask me to offer an amendment to strike either point 1 and 2 or just number 2, I'm fine with that as well. But I'll probably vote yes because I want the money to hire more mental health professionals. And if someone else decides that, that's disappointing to me, but I want to focus on what ECA is to do for more funding. I totally respect the idea of rejecting this as well, or rejecting it unless there's an amendment.
Sorry.
Let's go to Commissioner Clements and then I'll come back to you, Commissioner Zerf.
Thank you, Commissioner Nordin. I share your concerns about both point A1 and A2. I hear the understanding about getting more resources and letting local districts decide, but I do think that if funding is newly available from the state, it should be evidence-based. There shouldn't be a whole lot of wiggle room. I mean, there may be an appeal process for how do you deviate from that, but I think there's a lot of concern about A1 about how that can be used. It's can be open-ended. You can almost justify anything, and I think the SRO issue is just one that it needs to be parsed more, as others have described. But I mean, in general, I think that the having a comprehensive school safety legislation is an excellent idea. I just don't know if the way that it's currently worded is something that I have great confidence in.
Commissioner Zur.
Yeah. So I really appreciated the language that was used today in our work session about remembering what our values are. And as a district, I think we've leaned pretty heavily into valuing best practices around this type of these types of structures within our schools. And so as a representative of the Eau Claire, school district, and as I think that I want to see points 3 to 6. Absolutely. I think that's that holds up to my values as a representative of this district, but points 1 and 2 do not. So I would propose amending how do I do that? Amending the resolution.
So you would move to amend the motion.
Okay.
Approve with, I assume, to approve 2109 with striking on the condition that items A, 1, and 2 were removed, I guess.
That. Can I
say so moved?
So moved, that.
But Dr. Vika, did you want to put something in before you did?
No, I did find when you sent the PDF that contained the full versions of these, and this resolution comes from, in the full version, they do actually, it's not been modified. It did call for hiring of SROs.
Sure.
And the infrastructure.
I'm sorry, I probably needed to point of order myself there. There is a motion. We have to ask for a second first. Second. Is there discussion on this motion? Commissioner Clemens.
I would just say that from point of discussion, I think that discussion of security improvements in infrastructure and SROs should be within that comprehensive school safety legislation. I just don't think it belongs as a certain aspect under new permanent consistent funding.
So at this time, then, I think we'll call the question on the amendment. So this vote is only to decide whether we will then vote on the resolution as proposed, or we will vote on approving the resolution as amended and offered by Commissioner Zur. So this is not the final vote on the amendment. It's only if we are going to change the motion on the floor.
Commissioner Harder?
Yes.
Commissioner Lyons?
No.
Commissioner Nordin?
No.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Commissioner Zur?
Yes.
Commissioner Vika?
Yes.
Commissioner Clements?
Yes.
The motion passes, and so our motion is amended to approve Resolution 2109, Comprehensive School Safety Legislation, with the delegate, I guess, offering the amendments as long as it is amended to strike A1 and A2. I think the implication of the fallback is if that amendment either doesn't go through, so if it does not, if that amendment is not the case, then the instruction would be to vote no on it. Correct. So any other additional discussion on the current motion? Hearing none, then we'll call the question.
Commissioner Lyons?
Yes.
Commissioner Nordin?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Commissioner Zur?
Yes.
Commissioner Vika?
Yes.
Commissioner Clements?
Yes.
Commissioner Harder?
Yes.
Thank you. The final one is Resolution 2110, School District Mascots, Logos, and Imagery. Before a motion is made, I just want to give a little bit of background on this because it is similar to one that came up last year at the Delegate Assembly. There was a motion last year, there was a resolution last year to for WASB to support banning the use of indigenous or native mascots, logos, etc. That motion was put forward by WASA and a number of other districts. I believe Eau Claire sent a version as well in support of that resolution. That resolution failed at last year's WASB assembly. This year, WASA, Green Bay, and Ladysmith all together, I think, resubmitted essentially the exact same resolution again, because their version calls for a ban on the use of native and indigenous mascots and logos. The version here, of course, has WASB supporting discussion among districts, so it has been toned down from what was submitted. Now, there's a couple ways to think about it, and we can talk about that. Dr. Vika brought up to me that this had happened, some of the things that with our version last time. I reached out to Tricia Zunker, who, as far as I know, remains the president of the WASA school board, to ask, the version you submitted is somewhat different than what WASB is proposing. How does WASA feel about this? I unfortunately did not hear back from her over the last 2 weeks, maybe it's 10 days. So I don't have that information, and I don't know if that background is particularly useful because we have to vote on, the resolution that's in front of us. But this has been an attempt, and this is a dialed down attempt. So I would rather vote for the original one because we supported it last year, and I would like to see those mascots banned. However, I'm a little nervous myself about voting no on it because I don't want to say, no, they shouldn't have those conversations. So it's a little tricky for me, and that's sort of my pitch on it. I'm unsure which way we should vote, and I was hoping to get some guidance that we could go with those that submitted it, but we didn't get that. So that's where I am on this particular one. I'd hear more discussion or a motion at any time.
So
Go ahead, Commissioner Zer.
To be clear, if we propose, if we just cross all this out and write our own and propose it as, then if that doesn't pass, then we're somehow oddly obligated to vote against this. We don't have to vote against it, correct? If our amendment, if our proposed amendment fails, we could still technically vote for this. Is that correct?
Sure. I would.
Because I would like stronger language.
Sure.
Yeah.
I would rather take the lead on that. And this is something that we could decide as a board as well. I would like to, I perhaps would like to sit and wait to see how Ladysmith and Green Bay and WASA. So the resolution was written by an Indigenous person, so I would rather just use their language exactly or co-sponsor that as opposed to writing our own, just because we don't need to take voice when it's already been written, and especially by an affected group. And it was, anyway, so we could also
yes, I agree.
Vote. We could sort of vote conditionally, Dr. Vika.
So those three districts, their wording is identical. They say require districts to retire.
Correct, and it's WASA's, I think it's the original author, and Green Bay and Ladysmith signed on it.
Yeah. So I think your wait and see approach, will they, this is considerably different. So will those three districts and others, could be us among the others, move to have the original resolutions from this year?
Right. One concern is the vote was not particularly close last year at the delegate assembly. Yes, I think all of us here, I know President Torres came back to us at that time and expressed a lot of disappointment in the process, and I think many of us here were surprised. But it was not, 1 or 2 votes away. It was a strongly against on that, and that's another hesitation I have about resubmitting that language is, did the WASB committee say, well, we know that last year that resolution failed by a fairly wide margin. Is this our opportunity to get something across the line, even if it's, in my opinion, incredibly toothless? Dr. Johnson.
Well, it would potentially make sense, or there's great support why the previous motion failed if you actually go back to resolution 2104, where Wisconsin has not adequately addressed Act 31 in this particular state. So it ties hand in hand why. So either way, I would be in support. I'm more in support of having the original language, or that language supported by that, or if we're trying to just move the needle just a little bit with the current language, which I really don't even know. 2110 is not really that effective to me. So I had intended to vote. I had intended to vote no, in hopes that I did not know the backstory.
And that's why I went ahead and did that before we had the motion.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you.
I should ask if there are any of my colleagues have anything else that they'd like to add. What I'd like to do is, I want to try this on as I'd like to move that we support the original language as a primary goal of this particular vote. And either if it does not get brought forward as an amendment, or if that particular language fail, we then approve this resolution. So is there a second for that particular motion?
Second.
Discussion on the motion. Commissioner Clemens.
Thank you, Commissioner Nordin. Similar to you, I think struggling with not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, especially given you're relating on how this has gone in recent years. That being said, I'm not used to trying to figure out how to compromise so severely as I think this is. So, I would rather there be some progress, hoping for future additional progress, than have none at all. That's just my take at this point.
And certainly we can be considering the future. Our board can send resolutions to WASB. We can work in concert with WASA. As I said, I did not get a response back at this time, but I would be interested in working with WASA and co-sponsoring a similar thing in the future. I think it's important. But other comment or discussion? Commissioner Lyons.
So I just want to get clarification. The motion is that as the delegate, you're going to support the original language. But if the original language doesn't make it to the floor, you're supporting this resolution.
Correct. If it doesn't make it to the floor, or if that language comes up and then fails, then the sort of fallback is to then support this resolution.
All right. I support that. Thank you.
Hearing no additional comment, we'll call the question.
Commissioner Nordin?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Commissioner Zur?
Yes.
Commissioner Vika?
Yes.
Commissioner Clements?
Yes.
Commissioner Harder?
Yes.
Commissioner Lyons?
Yes.
All right, just as a reminder, and maybe I will ask you to send me notes just for this particular section, just to confirm. But I have us as voting no on resolution 2101, voting yes on the remainder, with the following conditions on 2109, amend the resolution to exclude A1, high security improvements to infrastructure, and A2, hiring SROs. And the kind of caveat that we would support the original language of Wausau, Ladysmith, Green Bay on 2110 school district mascots. And could that not come to the floor or fail, then support 2110. Hearing no outcry that I have missed it, I will take that as the instructions to the delegate assembly on Wednesday, and I will report back at our next meeting and perhaps an email before that. At this time, then, I will ask for requests for future agenda items.
Would it be possible for us to discuss, or how would we discuss, where would we discuss the possibility of hiring somebody as a consultant for coherent governance? Just, would that happen someplace in a committee, or would that happen with the full board?
That should happen with the full board. I had done a little bit of digging originally, and now I don't know what level of consultancy, but the one number I found for Aspen Group was $50,000. And so we'll have to dig in a little bit, but that needs to be a full board discussion. We can put it on at some point for.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't have to be anytime soon. I was just thinking, right. You know, I think we've heard that enough, and that seems to be, I think I would feel a lot more confident. I think I would feel a lot more confident as we are drafting things and bringing things forward and talking about things that, you know, even just hearing them say, hey, you're onto something. Hey, that's a good, you know, thing to think about. And hey, this is how you could think about it, or this is how you could come at it. I think that is incredibly helpful for our work. And I think that we would be doing ourselves a disservice if we didn't feel really, really, really confident with every single moving piece and component. And you are a variable X. This is your PhD. This is like what you do. So there's a very easy, I think, knowledge gap for some of us to fall into, where we're just going to be like, well, Tim's handling that, you know. I'm sorry.
You're fine.
Mr. Nordine is handling that. So you know, I was thinking it'd be really great for us to at least have a discussion, know our options, know where we're at, and be really comfortable with yes or no on that decision.
Sure.
You know,
I think we can talk about it in agenda setting and maybe do some digging to get some numbers, because I think, you know, that particular number that I found, and again, I don't know what level of service that was, but that was eye-popping to me a little bit. Maybe it's standard, but I think we could get some more information on what that might look like and the cost breakdown, and we can have that discussion as a future kind of committee report in that section, and then potentially act on that at a future meeting. But we can discuss that as well. Other requests for future agenda items. Seeing none, I appreciate all of you staying a bit later than our planned time. At least we've started early to try to get out to celebrate the MLK holiday. I would hear a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Y'all didn't all vote, but that's abstentions. So good night, everybody.
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between Newsworks and the Eau Claire Area School Board. Newsworks is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, please contact us via phone at 715-839-5067 or online at valleymediaworks.org.